My family never stopped mocking me for marrying what they called just an ordinary office worker. They laughed at our simple life, constantly parading their excessive wealth in our faces. That was until my husband appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine. Within minutes, their arrogant confidence vanished. Their darkest secrets unraveled, and absolute panic spread through the entire family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who severely underestimated your true worth. My name is Nia, 32 years old, and somehow still healing from the deep emotional wounds my family inflicted over decades. Growing up in the elite social circles of Buckhead, Atlanta, meant absolute privilege to outside observers. But inside our sprawling estate, emotional coldness permeated every single corner. Our massive home, with its manicured green lawns and grand crystal chandeliers, was a fortress of impossible expectations I could never quite meet. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight grades, joined prestigious honor societies, and did absolutely everything to earn just a fraction of the praise my older sister Valerie received effortlessly. But nothing I accomplished was ever enough for them. I was always the designated family disappointment, because I chose genuine passion over manufactured prestige. I became an independent fine art curator instead of a ruthless corporate lawyer like my older sister. My parents, Judge Winston and Camille, treated my career like a humiliating hobby that brought shame to our family name. When I married Elijah, a quiet man they believed was merely a low-level data analyst, my status as the family scapegoat was permanently sealed. They desperately wanted me to marry a local politician to elevate their social standing. Instead, I chose a man who actually loved me, a man whose quiet brilliance they completely failed to recognize. The climax of their relentless cruelty occurred during my parents' 40th wedding anniversary dinner. We were seated in a spectacular private dining room at a highly exclusive old money country club in the heart of the city. The room was draped in luxury, featuring heavy velvet curtains, custom floral arrangements, and brilliant lighting that reflected off the polished silverware. My brother-in-law Terrence, an arrogant investment banker who never missed an opportunity to flaunt his immense wealth, had completely taken control of the entire evening. He spent the dinner dominating the conversation and barking orders at the restaurant staff. Terrence deliberately ordered the absolute most expensive items on the menu, making sure the waitstaff and everyone at the table knew exactly how much money he supposedly moved on Wall Street. He ordered 4 bottles of vintage Bordeaux wine exclusively for himself, Valerie, and my parents. Elijah and I were not offered a single glass, which was perfectly fine by us, as we preferred to quietly enjoy our own company and avoid their toxic conversations. But Terrence was not satisfied with merely excluding us from the celebration. He desperately needed a grand performance to validate his fragile ego. The polite clinking of crystal glasses and the soft hum of classical background music were violently interrupted when the waiter finally brought the evening bill. Terrence aggressively snatched the leather check presenter from the waiter, glanced briefly at the total, and then violently tossed it directly across the large mahogany table. The heavy leather folder slid aggressively across the polished wood and hit Elijah squarely in the chest before dropping heavily onto his lap. The entire room went completely silent as my family turned their attention toward my husband, waiting to see how he would react to this blatant disrespect. The final bill was exactly $12,000. Terrence leaned back in his tufted leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest with a smug, predatory grin. He projected his voice so loudly that even the servers lingering near the dining room doors flinched in surprise. "Split it down the middle, data boy," Terrence demanded cruelly. "Or does your entire monthly paycheck only cover the tip for a meal like this?" The entire table immediately erupted into loud, humiliating laughter. Terrence threw his head back, highly amused by his own terrible disrespect. Valerie covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with genuine amusement, while my parents chuckled warmly as if Terrence had just delivered a brilliant comedic performance. My face burned with intense heat. The sheer disrespect of demanding my husband pay $6,000 for vintage wine he was not even allowed to drink was entirely sickening. I reached down for my purse, fully prepared to pull out my own business credit card and end this embarrassing public display, but my mother Camille sharply intervened before I could even open it. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face, her expression twisting into a familiar condescending sneer. "Sit down, Nia," my mother commanded, her voice dripping with absolute disdain. "I warned you exactly what would happen when you rejected the mayor's son to marry a keyboard pusher. Now you have to face the miserable consequences of your rebellious choices. Look at that cheap off-the-rack dress you are wearing to my spectacular anniversary dinner. You look like a complete peasant sitting among royalty. You have been a massive disappointment to this family since the day you chose that useless art degree over law school just to spite us," my mother continued relentlessly. "You could have easily had a beautiful life of luxury and social respect. Instead, you drag this embarrassment into our exclusive social circle and expect us to treat him like an equal." My father, Judge Winston, slowly swirled the red wine in his expensive glass and nodded in solemn agreement with my mother's cruel assessment. "You brought this humiliation upon yourself, Nia," my father stated with his heavy, authoritative, judicial tone. "We gave you a highly prestigious last name and an unparalleled upbringing in elite Atlanta society. You threw our legacy back in our faces to play with paintings and colors." Terrence, seeing my parents actively validate his bullying, leaned even further over the table. His eyes locked onto Elijah with raw, unhidden aggression, eager to assert his dominance over the man he considered completely beneath him. "If you cannot afford to dine with the absolute elite, you should not have bothered showing up tonight," Terrence challenged aggressively. "I should have the country club security throw you out right now for wasting our valuable time. I can easily pay this entire $12,000 bill with pocket change from my annual banking bonus. I move billions of dollars on Wall Street every day, while you sit in a tiny cubicle crunching meaningless numbers for people like me." Valerie finally stopped laughing and fixed her sharp, calculating eyes directly on me. Her smile was incredibly venomous and full of spite. "Do not try to act brave," Nia, Valerie mocked loudly. "Do not bother opening that cheap little purse of yours to save him. We already know your small art consulting business is probably bankrupt anyway. You two are just starving parasites intentionally ruining our parents' beautiful 40th anniversary dinner because you are jealous of our success. My law firm represents several major art galleries in this city," Valerie continued ruthlessly, "and I know for an absolute fact that the industry is drying up for untalented amateurs like you. You probably came here tonight hoping Dad would write you a pathetic pity check to keep your apartment lights on. You need to hit rock bottom so you will finally leave this absolute loser, come crawling back to the family estate in tears and work as my personal secretary. It is the only real future you have left in this world." I felt a fierce, burning surge of anger rising fast in my throat, ready to scream at my sister for her unbelievable arrogance and cruelty. But before I could utter a single defensive word, I felt a warm, deeply reassuring hand cover mine gently under the table. It was Elijah. His handsome face was completely calm and remarkably composed. There was absolutely no embarrassment, no defensive anger, and no fear whatsoever in his deep brown eyes. He looked at Terrence with the detached, mild curiosity of someone observing a loud, misbehaving child throwing a tantrum. Elijah calmly brushed the heavy leather folder off his lap and picked it up with elegant grace. He did not break his intense eye contact with my arrogant brother-in-law for even a fraction of a second. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah reached into the inner pocket of his tailored, understated jacket. He completely bypassed his regular wallet and pulled out a heavy, solid black metal card. The card caught the dim light of the crystal chandelier above us, revealing absolutely no recognizable bank logo, no standard account numbers, and no expiration date, just a sleek, highly intimidating matte black finish. He placed the heavy metal card squarely on top of the $12,000 bill and pushed it smoothly toward the exact center of the table. "I will cover the whole table," Terrence, Elijah said, his voice incredibly smooth, highly commanding and completely undisturbed by the toxic chaos around him. "Keep your precious banking bonus money safely in your pocket, Terrence, because you are going to desperately need every single penny of it very soon." Then Elijah shifted his calm, piercing gaze directly toward my older sister. He leaned forward just slightly, resting his arms on the table with an air of absolute authority that commanded the entire room's silent attention. But Valerie, he continued, his tone dangerously quiet and precise, who exactly told you my wife's business was failing? The silence that followed his question was so profound that you could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock out in the hallway. My sister's confident smirk faltered for the very first time that evening. She blinked clearly, caught off guard by the sheer undeniable weight of his presence. They had spent years treating him like a harmless shadow, completely unaware that they had just awakened a sleeping giant who was now fully prepared to strike back without mercy. The young waiter stepped forward tentatively, breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the private dining room tonight. His hands shook slightly as he reached out to take the heavy black metal card from the mahogany table. He looked thoroughly confused by the unfamiliar object, turning it over in his hands to find a standard chip. Finding nothing that resembled a normal credit card, he gave Elijah a highly skeptical glance before bowing awkwardly and hurrying out of the room to process the payment. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind him, sealing us back inside the toxic atmosphere. Valerie quickly recovered from her momentary shock, adjusting the collar of her designer blazer and tossing her expensive silk extensions over her shoulder. Her signature smirk returned, sharper and more vicious than ever before. "You want to know who told me your little art business was failing?" Valerie asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and deep corporate arrogance. "I did not just hear about it, Elijah. I personally orchestrated it. I am a senior partner at the most ruthless corporate law firm in Atlanta. I have connections with every major gallery owner and wealthy art collector in this city. Last week, I invited the owner of Nia's biggest client gallery to a private lunch at the Commerce Club. I strongly advised him that associating his prestigious brand with a struggling, disconnected amateur like Nia was a terrible financial liability. I casually mentioned that my law firm might have to reconsider representing his gallery if he continued to throw away his money on my sister's pathetic little vanity project. Naturally, he dropped her contract the very next morning. My mother gasped, not in horror, but in absolute delight. She clapped her hands together, looking at Valerie like a proud parent. My sister had just won a Nobel Prize for her incredible cruelty. "Oh, Valerie, that was incredibly smart," my mother praised enthusiastically. "You always know exactly how to handle difficult situations." My father nodded his heavy head in stern approval, swirling his vintage wine with a look of deep satisfaction. "Sometimes a firm hand is the only way to teach a stubborn child a valuable lesson," my father added coldly. I sat there listening to my own flesh and blood openly celebrate the deliberate sabotage of my livelihood. They were actively proud of destroying my 5-year career. "I did it for your own good," Nia Valerie continued, leaning across the table with a fake expression of sisterly concern that made my stomach turn completely inside out. "You have been living in a pathetic fantasy world ever since you married this data entry clerk. You needed a harsh reality check. You need to hit rock bottom so you will finally wake up, leave this absolute loser, and come back to the family where you belong. When your silly little business officially files for bankruptcy next week, I will graciously hire you to work as my own personal assistant. You can fetch my coffee, organize my legal briefs, and learn what real success looks like. It is the only way you will ever survive in this city without our parents' money backing you up." Terrence chimed in, pointing his fork at Elijah. "You hear that, data boy? You cannot even provide for your own wife. Your sister-in-law has to give her a pity job just to keep a roof over your heads." I looked around the table at the four of them. For 29 years, I had allowed their constant criticism to make me feel small. I had absorbed their insults, internalized their rejection, and desperately tried to prove my worth to people who were entirely committed to misunderstanding me. But tonight was completely different. The fierce anxiety that usually choked my throat in their presence was entirely gone, replaced by a cool, unshakable clarity. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I calmly reached into my clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen and opened my secure banking application. I tapped on the recent transaction history, ensuring the brightness was turned all the way up. Without rushing, I smoothly slid the phone across the polished mahogany table directly toward Valerie. It stopped right next to her expensive wine glass. They did not drop me, Valerie. I said, my voice perfectly level and carrying a quiet authority that I had never used with my family before today. I dropped them. I terminated my contract with that local gallery 2 days before your little power lunch even happened because they could no longer afford my exclusive curation rates. Valerie frowned, looking down at the glowing screen of my phone. Her eyes quickly scanned the bold numbers displayed. You see, I continued keeping my posture completely relaxed. I recently signed a massive exclusive contract to become the chief art director and global curator for a major tech conglomerate out in Silicon Valley. They are building a massive new corporate headquarters, and they wanted someone with my exact artistic vision to design their entire cultural aesthetic. The gallery owner you threatened was actually furious because I took my entire portfolio of artists with me when I left. Valerie stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. The smirk had been completely wiped off her face. The numbers were undeniable. What is this? Valerie demanded, her voice losing its polished corporate edge. She grabbed the phone, bringing it closer to her face, as if the digital numbers might miraculously change if she stared at them hard enough right now. This cannot possibly be real. It is entirely real, I replied smoothly. That $5 million retainer cleared my business account early this morning. It is just the initial payment for the first phase of the global project. So no, Valerie, I will not be fetching your coffee or organizing your legal briefs. My art consulting firm is not bankrupt today. In fact, I made more money before breakfast today than you make in 3 years of billing hours at your toxic law firm. I do not need your pity job, and I certainly do not need this family money to survive. The tension in the private dining room skyrocketed. My sister, the golden child, who had always used her income to assert dominance over me, was visibly trembling with raw, unfiltered jealousy. My father, Judge Winston, suddenly erupted. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He slammed his heavy fist down on the dining table with such explosive force. The silverware clattered loudly against the fine china. Lies, my father roared, his deep voice echoing off the velvet walls of the private room. Absolute fabricated lies. No major corporation hands a $5 million contract to a total failure. You deliberately forged that bank statement just to save face in front of your betters. How dare you bring this childish deception into my presence and insult our intelligence like this? You have always been a deceitful, manipulative child, my mother quickly added, eager to support my father's aggressive outburst. You probably paid someone to create that fake bank screen. You are embarrassing yourself, Nia. Put that silly phone away and apologize to your sister immediately. Terrence leaned back, recovering his arrogant posture. He let out a loud, mocking scoff. A $5 million retainer, he mocked aggressively. Please, I am an investment banker. I handle real wealth every single day. If a tech conglomerate was throwing around that kind of cash for office decorations, my firm would know about it. You are pathetic, Nia. You and your data boy husband deserve each other. You both live in a complete fantasy world. Elijah watched their explosive reactions with calm amusement. I did not rush to defend the $5 million contract. He simply reached out, took my hand again, and offered me a small private smile that communicated absolute solidarity. We let them rant and rave, watching the ugly truth of their characters spill out into the open room. Valerie crossed her arms, her chest heaving as she tried to compose her shattered ego, desperate to firmly believe that my financial success was nothing more than an elaborate digital hoax. Just as my father took a deep breath to launch into another vicious insult, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. The restaurant manager rushed back into the room. He was pale, sweating profusely and breathing heavily as if he had just sprinted all the way from the main office. His eyes darted nervously around the tense room before landing directly on Elijah. He was holding Elijah's solid black metal card with trembling hands. "Sir," the machine declined it, he stammered, pale and shaking, requiring a level 1 security override. Terrence suddenly erupted into loud, triumphant, mocking laughter, pointing a finger at my husband. "I knew it," Terrence screamed loud. "The data boy brought a fake prop card to dinner tonight." The heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room suddenly swung open, interrupting the suffocating tension that had gripped our table. The restaurant manager rushed inside, completely out of breath. His face was entirely devoid of color, and beads of sweat formed a thick sheen across his forehead. He looked absolutely terrified. Right behind him stood the young waiter from earlier, looking equally paralyzed by fear. The manager was clutching Elijah's solid black metal card between his trembling fingers, as if he were holding a live explosive device. Terrence instantly took this as his moment of absolute victory. My arrogant brother-in-law slammed his hands down on the table and stood up so quickly that his heavy chair screeched loudly against the polished hardwood floor. "I knew it!" Terrence screamed, pointing a thick accusatory finger directly at my husband. "I knew this entire thing was a pathetic scam. The data boy brought a fake prop card to a luxury establishment. Manager, I demand you call your security team right this instant. Have this absolute fraud arrested for trying to pass off a fake credit card at my in-laws' anniversary dinner." My mother Camille let out a loud gasp of manufactured horror, clutching her pearl necklace, as if she were about to faint from the sheer scandal of it all. My father, Judge Winston, crossed his arms and glared at Elijah with the ultimate look of judicial condemnation. Valerie smiled wickedly, clearly thrilled that her desperate prediction about our financial ruin was supposedly coming true. But the restaurant manager did not call for security. He did not even look at Terrence. Instead, he desperately waved his free hand in the air, his eyes wide with sheer panic. No, you completely misunderstand." The manager stammered, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. He practically pushed Terrence aside and rushed directly toward my husband. To the absolute astonishment of everyone in the room, the manager bowed deeply from his waist. It was not a standard courteous nod. It was a deep, respectful bow of total submission. "Mr. Hayes," the manager began, his voice trembling so badly he could barely get the words out. "I am so incredibly sorry for the delay. The terminal did not decline your card due to insufficient funds. The system flagged the transaction because it required a Level 1 executive security override from the Central Banking Authority." Terrence scoffed loudly, refusing to accept what was happening right in front of his face. "Security override? What kind of ridiculous excuse is that? Just arrest him already." The manager ignored Terrence completely, keeping his terrified eyes locked firmly on Elijah. "Sir, the central bank director just called my personal cell phone to personally verify the transaction. He wanted to ensure that you were not being inconvenienced." The manager swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table to steady his shaking legs. "Not only is your $12,000 dinner bill fully cleared, but the bank director informed me of the recent corporate developments. He told me that your private family office formally acquired the entire luxury hospitality group that owns this country club at 9 o'clock this morning." The manager bowed his head even lower, presenting the black metal card back to Elijah with both hands. "Sir, you literally own the building we are standing in right now. You own the entire country club." Dead silence fell over the private dining room. It was not just quiet. It was the kind of absolute vacuum-sealed silence that sucks the air right out of your lungs. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock out in the hallway. Terrence stood frozen in place. His jaw literally dropped open, hanging slack, as his aggressive posture melted into complete and utter shock. The arrogant investment banker looked like someone had just punched him squarely in the stomach. He stared at the manager, then at the black card, and finally at Elijah, completely unable to process the astronomical wealth required to purchase an entire portfolio of elite country clubs before breakfast. Beside him, my mother experienced a total system failure. Camille, the woman who had spent my entire life obsessing over high society optics and maintaining a flawless image, was so stunned that her hand went completely limp. The expensive crystal champagne flute she had been holding slipped right through her manicured fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp crash of breaking glass echoed violently through the quiet room, but my mother did not even flinch. She just stared at Elijah with her eyes wide and her mouth trembling. My father, the supposedly unshakable judge. Winston looked as if he were having a medical emergency. His face, which had been bright red with anger just moments ago, drained of all color until he looked like a ghost. He gripped the edges of the dining table so tightly that his knuckles turned completely white, desperately trying to anchor himself to a reality that no longer existed. Valerie, however, refused to accept defeat. Her massive corporate ego simply could not handle being crushed by the man she had mocked for years. She jumped up from her chair, her designer silk extensions flying over her shoulder. "This is a scam," Valerie stammered, her voice shrill and unhinged. "This is an elaborate, pathetic play. You bribed him, did you not? Nia, you used your little $5 million advance to pay off the restaurant manager to come in here and put on a fake performance to scare us. There is absolutely no way this data entry clerk bought a country club." The manager looked at Valerie as if she had lost her mind. "Madam, I assure you this is no performance. The central bank director himself confirmed the acquisition. Mr. Hayes is the supreme stakeholder of this property." Elijah did not gloat. He did not laugh or throw their cruel words back in their faces. His complete lack of arrogance made the moment even more devastating. He calmly reached out and took his black metal card from the trembling manager. He slipped the heavy card back into his tailored jacket with smooth, effortless grace. "I like the ambiance here, Nia," Elijah said, his voice entirely conversational and completely relaxed, as if he were discussing the weather rather than buying a multi-million-dollar estate. "The architecture has good bones, and the private dining rooms offer excellent acoustics. I think we should keep the current staff in place. They seem highly attentive to detail." Elijah paused, his dark eyes sliding lazily over to Terence, who was still standing paralyzed by the table. "Well, we will keep most of the staff," Elijah corrected smoothly. "I think we should fire the front valet. He has terrible judgment. He actually let Terence park his leased Porsche directly in the fire lane out front. That is a massive liability for my new property." Terence flinched as if he had been physically struck. The revelation that his luxury sports car was merely a lease, a fact he had desperately hidden from my wealthy parents to maintain his facade of infinite success, hung in the air like a bad smell. My father shot Terence a sharp, questioning glare, realizing that his favorite son-in-law might be living a completely fabricated lifestyle. The humiliation was absolute. Terence was being stripped of his dignity, his financial superiority, and his fake wealthy persona all at the same time. The man who had spent the last 2 hours barking orders and bragging about his Wall Street bonuses was now standing in a building owned entirely by the man he had just tried to publicly humiliate. But narcissists like Terence do not surrender easily. When cornered, their massive egos force them to lash out with whatever weapons they have left. Desperate to re-establish his dominance as the true alpha male of the family, Terence slammed his hands on the table and leaned directly into Elijah's personal space. His face contorted with raw, unfiltered desperation and toxic pride. "So what?" Terence spat, his voice shaking with furious rage. "You bought a cheap rundown golf club in the suburbs, big deal. That does not impress me, Elijah. You are just playing with real estate scraps. I am a senior investment banker. I handle the kind of wealth that would make your head spin." Terence puffed out his chest, desperately clinging to his corporate title as if it were a life raft in a sinking ship. "My firm is leading the initial public offering for Apex Ledger tomorrow morning. Do you even know what that is, Data Boy? It is the biggest financial technology unicorn in global history. I personally structured the deal. I move billions of dollars across the global market every single day. You might own this stupid little restaurant, but I operate on Wall Street. In the real world of high finance, you are still absolutely nothing compared to me." Terence continued his frantic rant, completely unable to stop himself from digging an even deeper grave. His voice grew louder, bouncing harshly off the velvet walls of the private dining room. "You think flashing a metal card makes you a titan of industry?" Terence mocked, sweat now dripping visibly down the sides of his face. "You think you can just waltz into our family dinner and pretend to be on my level because you bought some outdated brick-and-mortar property? My clients are billionaires, Elijah. Actual verified billionaires who control global markets and dictate the global economy. I sit in boardrooms with men who could buy and sell you before their morning coffee. My parents, desperate to cling to any remaining shred of their own social superiority, immediately latched on to Terence's aggressive boasting. My mother, recovering slightly from the shock of dropping her glass, eagerly nodded her head. Yes, Terence is absolutely right, Camille chimed in, her voice shrill and trembling with nervous energy. Owning a local country club does not make you elite, Elijah. It just makes you a glorified landlord. Terence is handling a historic Wall Street initial public offering. That is real generational prestige. That is the kind of high society power this family respects. My father quickly joined the desperate chorus, adjusting his expensive tie and clearing his throat to regain his judicial authority. Terence operates in the upper echelons of global finance, Judge Winston stated, pointing a stern finger at my husband. You might have stumbled into some money, Elijah, but you will never possess the refined corporate pedigree that Terence brings to our family name. You are still just an outsider, trying to buy your way into a world you simply do not understand. Valerie crossed her arms, her earlier panic slowly transforming back into a venomous, calculating smirk. Enjoy your little real estate purchase, Elijah, Valerie sneered coldly. But remember who holds the real power in this city. When my husband finalizes the Apex Ledger initial public offering tomorrow, his firm will control the financial sector. He will be untouchable, and you will still just be Nia's ordinary, boring husband playing dress-up. I sat perfectly still, listening to my family desperately attempt to rebuild their shattered egos by hiding behind Terrence's Wall Street job. They were so blinded by their toxic obsession with status that they completely ignored the profound, dangerous calmness radiating from my husband. Elijah did not blink. He did not back away from Terrence's aggressive posture. He just sat there listening to them brag about the Apex Ledger initial public offering, a quiet, knowing smile slowly forming on his lips as the trap closed. Terrence smirked, believing he had finally won. You have absolutely nothing to say now, do you, data boy? Terrence taunted, leaning back with immense satisfaction. You finally realize you are completely out of your league. You cannot compete with my elite Wall Street connections. Elijah maintained his chilling composure. He reached for his crystal water glass, taking a very slow, deliberate sip. The absolute silence in the room returned heavy with anticipation as my brilliant husband prepared to deliver the final devastating blow. Elijah set his crystal glass back onto the table with a soft, definitive clink. Terence completely misinterpreted my husband's deliberate silence as absolute submission. Eager to reclaim his position as the undisputed alpha male of the room, Terence puffed out his chest, aggressively adjusting his expensive silk tie. He leaned heavily over the mahogany table, looking down at Elijah with profound, unadulterated contempt. You do not even understand the vocabulary of the world I operate in. Terence began, his voice dripping with venomous arrogance and toxic corporate pride. Let me educate you, data boy. Tomorrow morning, when the opening bell rings on the New York Stock Exchange, my firm is executing the initial public offering for Apex Ledger. We spent the last 6 agonizing months organizing exclusive institutional roadshows across 3 different continents. I personally structured the retail tranches and engineered the complex liquidity pools. We successfully secured a staggering $12 billion valuation for the company. Do you even have the mental capacity to comprehend what $12 billion looks like on a balance sheet? Terence did not wait for an answer. He paced slightly behind his chair, soaking in the rapt attention of my parents. My firm is securing a massive 5% underwriting commission on this historic deal, Terence bragged, locking eyes with my father to ensure his approval. That is $600 million in gross fees, Winston. My personal performance bonus alone will easily clear $20 million by tomorrow afternoon. I am not buying a pathetic suburban country club. I am building a global financial empire that will dictate market trends for decades. My mother, Camille, completely desperate to erase the humiliating reality of Elijah's black card, immediately latched onto Terrence's familiar, easily understandable Wall Street prestige. She clapped her hands together, practically vibrating with renewed high society elitism. Oh, Terence, that is absolutely magnificent, my mother gushed, shooting a venomous glare in my direction. That is exactly the kind of generational wealth and undeniable corporate prestige that this family respects and demands. You see, Nia, that is what a real man does. He commands Wall Street. He dictates the economy. He does not hide behind flashy metal cards and cheap real estate tricks. My father aggressively nodded his agreement, desperately clinging to Terrence's boastful numbers to restore the natural order of his patriarchal universe. Brilliant work, Terrence, Judge Winston declared, his voice echoing with renewed authority. $12 billion is a staggering achievement. You are the true financial pillar of this family. You represent the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence in Atlanta. Elijah could play landlord to 100 golf courses, but he will never possess the intellectual pedigree required to manipulate the global stock market like you do. Valerie crossed her arms, her diamond rings catching the light as she sneered directly at me. I hope you are taking notes, Nia. My sister mocked relentlessly, her voice shrill with superiority. When my husband's massive bonus clears tomorrow, we are buying a spectacular secondary estate in the Hamptons. We operate in a completely different stratosphere. You and your husband are nothing but irrelevant spectators watching us conquer the corporate world. Elijah listened to their desperate collective ego trip with the same unnerving, absolute calmness he had maintained all evening. He did not show a single ounce of intimidation, frustration, or anger. Instead, he reached up and smoothly straightened the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket. He looked directly at Terrence, his dark eyes entirely devoid of any warmth. Your math is fundamentally flawed, Terrence, Elijah stated, his voice incredibly smooth but slicing through the heavy air of the dining room like a razor blade. Terrence stopped bragging instantly, his face twisting into a furious defensive scowl. Excuse me, what did you just say to me, you arrogant little clerk? I said your math is flawed, Elijah repeated, pronouncing every single syllable with lethal, unwavering precision. You are parading around this room boasting about a $12 billion valuation. But Apex Ledger did not price at $12 billion. The pricing committee locked in the final valuation at exactly $18 billion at exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon. The entire room froze in place. Terrence blinked rapidly, his confident posture fracturing as genuine confusion washed over his face. Elijah did not stop. He leaned slightly forward, his physical presence suddenly dominating the entire dining room, radiating an undeniable, crushing authority that made the air feel incredibly thin and hard to breathe. Furthermore, Elijah continued ruthlessly, your banking firm is absolutely not pocketing a massive 5% underwriting commission. The board of directors held an emergency closed-door meeting at 3:30 this afternoon. They thoroughly reviewed the disastrous way your managing director handled the institutional demand pricing. You severely undervalued the core asset to appease your legacy clients. Because of that gross incompetence, the board unilaterally slashed your firm's underwriting fee down to 1.5%. I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs with exhilarating anticipation. I watched my husband completely dismantle my arrogant brother-in-law, using facts so highly classified that nobody outside the absolute highest levels of Wall Street should have known them. There will be no $20 million bonus for you tomorrow, Terrence. Elijah concluded, his tone completely devoid of mercy. Your firm barely retained the contract, and you are currently seen as a massive liability by the very tech unicorn you claim to control. You do not move billions, you just mishandle them. The psychological destruction of Terrence happened in real time, right in front of my eyes. For 3 agonizing seconds, he stood completely paralyzed, his brain frantically trying to process how a low-level data analyst could possibly possess highly classified, up-to-the-minute financial data regarding the most secretive initial public offering of the decade. Then absolute unhinged fury took over completely. Terrence's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of purple. The thick veins in his neck bulged visibly against his expensive silk collar. He kicked his heavy dining chair backward with such aggressive force that it crashed violently against the velvet wall behind him, creating a loud, echoing thud. How dare you! Terrence roared loudly, spittle actually flying from his lips as he lunged forward, slamming both of his heavy fists down onto the mahogany table. How dare you sit there and pretend to know classified inside information about my private clients, you pathetic lying fraud! Terrence was completely out of control, breathing heavily like a cornered animal, desperate to defend its territory. Those numbers are sealed under severe federal non-disclosure agreements. Nobody outside the executive underwriting committee knows the final pricing details. You are literally making up numbers to sound intelligent because you are deeply intimidated by my overwhelming success. You are nothing but a bottom feeder crunching spreadsheets in a miserable little cubicle. My father immediately jumped to his feet, furious that Elijah had dared to challenge his favorite successful son-in-law. "That is enough, Elijah," Judge Winston bellowed aggressively, pointing a trembling finger at my husband. "You will not sit at my anniversary dinner and spew fabricated financial nonsense to insult Terrence. You are completely out of your depth, and your childish, pathetic lies are embarrassing this entire family." Valerie tightly gripped Terrence's arm, trying to physically hold him back, as he looked entirely ready to leap across the table and physically attack my husband. "Call security right now, Dad!" Valerie shrieked wildly, her voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. "Have Elijah thrown out into the street immediately. He is clearly having some sort of psychotic break. He is a dangerous, delusional liar. I will utterly destroy you for this disrespect!" Terrence screamed frantically, pointing a shaking hand directly at Elijah's calm face. "Tomorrow morning, I am calling my managing director. I will personally ensure that whatever pathetic little corporate data job you currently have is completely terminated. I will have you permanently blacklisted from every single tech company in this country. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I control the market." Elijah did not flinch. He did not move a single muscle to defend himself against Terrence's explosive, highly aggressive physical threats. He simply maintained his cold, piercing stare, allowing Terrence to scream and dig his own professional grave deeper and deeper with every arrogant, boastful word. The contrast between Terrence's frantic, screaming meltdown and Elijah's absolute terrifying stillness was incredible to witness. Just as Terrence pulled his arm back, looking as if he was actually going to throw his heavy crystal water glass directly at my husband's head, the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room suddenly swung wide open once again. The violent shouting in the room was instantly cut off. Everyone turned to look at the doorway in utter shock. A high-end corporate courier stepped smoothly into the room. He was dressed in a sleek, immaculate black uniform, wearing white cotton gloves and exuding an air of absolute unquestionable professionalism. In his gloved hands, the courier carried an enormous, wildly ornate gift basket overflowing with rare champagnes and imported European delicacies. Tucked securely under his other arm was a large, heavy object tightly wrapped in thick black velvet and sealed with a heavy custom gold wax stamp. The courier completely ignored the aggressive, suffocating tension in the room and stepped confidently up to the head of the mahogany table. He bowed respectfully, projecting his voice with clear, highly practiced authority that demanded immediate attention. "Pardon the interruption, ladies and gentlemen," the courier announced smoothly, his words cutting through the lingering echoes of Terrence's rage. "I have a highly secure special delivery for the Winston anniversary dinner, sent directly to this location courtesy of the Forbes editorial board." The courier stood perfectly still in the center of the room. He held the large velvet-wrapped frame with absolute reverence. My mother Camille immediately pushed her chair back and stood up. The sudden mention of the Forbes editorial board instantly and completely erased her previous panic over Terrence's explosive meltdown. In her superficial mind, a delivery from such an elite publication could only mean one thing. She assumed her relentless high society networking had finally paid off. She truly believed her powerful friends had arranged a spectacular tribute to celebrate my father's distinguished judicial career for their 40th anniversary. "Oh my goodness!" Camille gasped, dramatically pressing a hand to her chest. "Winston, darling, do you hear that? The Forbes editorial board sent a special delivery just for us. I knew my connections at the Commerce Club would arrange something incredibly prestigious for our anniversary. This is exactly the kind of top-tier recognition our family deserves." My mother marched aggressively toward the head of the table. She completely ignored Elijah and me, treating us like invisible peasants who were incredibly lucky to witness her glorious moment. She practically shoved the highly professional courier aside and aggressively snatched the heavy glass frame right out of his gloved hands. She did not even bother to thank the man. She was far too consumed by her own toxic vanity and her desperate need for constant social validation. I watched my mother proudly carry the heavy object back toward the center of the mahogany table. She held it up high for Terence and Valerie to admire. "Look at this, you two," Camille boasted loudly, her voice shrill with pure arrogance. "This is what true generational prestige looks like. A personalized tribute from Forbes magazine. I am absolutely sure they have profiled your father's incredible legacy on the bench. Nia, I highly suggest you pay very close attention right now. This is a level of elite corporate recognition that your data boy husband will never achieve in his entire pathetic life." My father, Judge Winston, puffed out his chest and adjusted his expensive suit jacket, looking incredibly smug. He leaned back in his tufted leather chair, fully prepared to receive what he believed was his rightful adoration. Winston actually offered Terence a condescending smile, as if to say that true power came from old money reputation rather than Wall Street bonuses. Terence crossed his arms, breathing heavily, but managing a forced smile, eager to bask in the reflected glory of his wealthy in-laws. Valerie clapped her hands together, looking at me with pure venom, waiting for my ultimate humiliation. Camille tightly gripped the top of the thick black velvet wrapping. With a grand theatrical flourish, she ripped the dark fabric away from the heavy glass frame. She had a massive, triumphant smile plastered across her face, entirely ready to boast to the entire room about her untouchable social status. But the boast never came. The triumphant smile completely froze on my mother's face. For one long, agonizing second, she just stared down at the large glass frame in her hands. Then every single drop of color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking like a pale, lifeless ghost. Her mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. Her eyes widened so far they looked as if they might physically pop out of her skull. Her entire body began to violently tremble. Camille stumbled backward in sheer terror. Her expensive designer heels caught on the edge of the thick dining room rug. She lost her balance completely and slammed hard into the heavy wooden chair behind her. The chair tipped backward and crashed violently to the hardwood floor with a deafening crack. Camille did not even try to catch herself. She just kept stumbling backward, clutching her throat as if all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. Her hands shook so uncontrollably that she could no longer hold the heavy object. The massive glass frame slipped from her fingers and dropped squarely onto the polished mahogany dining table with a loud, echoing thud. It landed face up directly under the bright light of the crystal chandelier. "Mother, what is wrong?" Valerie demanded, her voice laced with sudden, frantic panic. She rushed forward, abandoning her confident posture. "Did they print something negative about Dad?" My father stood up immediately, his face twisting with defensive anger. He assumed the prestigious publication had somehow insulted his judicial legacy. Winston marched forcefully toward the center of the table, completely ready to threaten severe lawsuits and massive defamation charges. Terence followed right behind him, eager to direct his lingering, unhinged aggression at whatever had caused his mother-in-law to have a complete psychological breakdown. Winston, Valerie, and Terence all crowded around the mahogany table, leaning over to look at the framed document. I sat perfectly still, holding my breath. Elijah remained exactly as he was, leaning back in his chair with an expression of profound, chilling calmness. The three of them stared down at the frame. Instantly, the exact same horrifying paralysis that had consumed my mother seized them as well. It was an advanced special edition copy of the brand new Forbes magazine. The cover was absolutely flawless, printed on premium glossy paper and encased in thick protective glass. Front and center, taking up almost the entire cover, was a stunning high-definition portrait of my husband. In the photograph, Elijah was not wearing the simple, understated jacket he had on tonight. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored bespoke suit that radiated absolute supreme wealth. He was leaning back in a massive leather executive chair with his hands steeped together. The lighting caught the sharp angles of his face, highlighting a look of raw, powerful, commanding authority. He looked like an absolute titan of global industry. He looked like a man who owned the entire world. But the photograph was not the most devastating part. The true psychological destruction came from the massive, bold text printed in gold and white letters right across his chest. The massive headline read, "Elijah Hayes, the Shadow Billionaire, behind Apex Ledger's $18 billion IPO. Below the main headline, a smaller subheading delivered an even more lethal blow. It read, "How a stealth tech genius completely disrupted Wall Street, built a massive global financial empire, and remained entirely hidden in plain sight." The entire room was paralyzed in sheer, unadulterated horror. The devastating reality of Elijah's supposed data analyst job finally clicked into place. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in their minds with crushing, brutal force. The solid black metal card that required a central bank director override. The effortless purchase of the entire luxury country club hospitality group before breakfast. The highly classified inside knowledge regarding the exact $18 billion pricing of the Apex Ledger initial public offering. The knowledge of the secret board meeting that slashed the underwriting commission fees. Elijah was not a low-level clerk, crunching meaningless spreadsheets in a miserable little cubicle. He was the founder. He was the chief executive officer. He was the supreme overlord of the very financial technology unicorn that Terrence had spent the entire evening loudly bragging about. Terrence had literally just spent the last 20 minutes screaming at, insulting, and physically threatening his own most powerful and important client. My family realized in one horrifying, heart-stopping instant that they had spent years relentlessly mocking, degrading, and humiliating a man who wielded enough financial power to crush their entire existence with a single phone call. Winston stared at the magazine cover, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked from the magazine to Elijah and back to the magazine, completely unable to reconcile the quiet man he had insulted with the billionaire titan glaring back at him from the glossy page. His judicial authority evaporated entirely. He looked incredibly old and deeply pathetic. Valerie gripped the edge of the dining table, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the wood, her knees actually buckled slightly. The senior corporate attorney, who prided herself on knowing every major player in the city, realized she had just actively tried to sabotage the wife of the most powerful man in the technology sector. The sheer magnitude of her fatal mistake washed over her, leaving her completely speechless and trembling with raw terror. But nobody looked worse than Terrence. The arrogant investment banker who had just boasted about moving billions of dollars across the global market looked as if his soul had forcefully left his body. All the aggressive crimson color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly grayish pallor. His eyes were completely glassy and totally unfocused. The realization that he had just aggressively demanded the chief executive officer of Apex Ledger split a $12,000 wine bill shattered his entire reality into a million unrecoverable pieces. The silent room froze. Terrence's cell phone violently rang, showing his managing director calling. The harsh electronic ring of Terrence's custom smartphone shattered the absolute silence of the private dining room like a blaring siren. The bright screen illuminated the dark mahogany table, flashing the name of the global managing director of his elite Wall Street investment bank. Terrence stared down at the glowing device as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. The aggressive arrogance he had paraded around the room all evening had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, unfiltered terror. Elijah casually leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands together with striking composure. He gestured lazily toward the vibrating phone resting near Terrence's trembling fingers. "You should answer that, Terrence," Elijah instructed, his voice radiating a cold, absolute authority that left no room for negotiation. "And make sure you put it on speaker. I believe the entire family would love to hear how your massive $20 million bonus is coming along." Terrence swallowed hard, his prominent Adam's apple bobbing nervously. His hand shook so violently that he fumbled the device twice before finally swiping the screen to accept the incoming call. He pressed the speaker button with a pale, trembling finger. Before Terrence could even utter a single greeting, the booming, enraged voice of his Wall Street managing director exploded through the small audio speaker, echoing aggressively off the velvet walls of the dining room. "Terrence, you absolute catastrophic idiot! The managing director!" roared his voice, dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "What in the world did you do tonight? We just received an emergency priority call directly from the executive board of directors over at Apex Ledger. They are pulling our entire underwriting contract effectively immediately. They legally severed all ties with our banking institution, and they cited your specific abhorrent behavior as the primary cause. Terrence physically recoiled, as if he had been punched in the face. Sir, please let me explain. Terrence stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. There has been a massive misunderstanding. Shut your mouth and listen to me, you incompetent fool! The managing director screamed, refusing to let Terrence defend himself. The board representative stated that you personally insulted and physically threatened their founder and chief executive officer at a private dinner tonight. Are you completely out of your mind? You just cost this investment bank hundreds of millions of dollars in guaranteed commissions. You destroyed a historic financial partnership because you could not control your pathetic, massive ego outside of business hours. My father, Judge Winston, slumped further down into his chair, his hands covering his face in utter disgrace. My mother, Camille, whimpered quietly, clutching the edge of the dining table as she watched her favorite wealthy son-in-law get verbally decimated on a public speakerphone. Valerie stood frozen, her designer dress suddenly looking entirely inadequate as the foundation of her luxurious lifestyle crumbled into dust right before her eyes. Please, sir, I beg you, Terrence pleaded desperately, dropping all pretenses of dignity. I did not know who he was. He was masquerading as a low-level data analyst. It was just a stupid family disagreement. I can fix this. Just let me apologize to the board. You do not have the clearance to apologize to anyone, the managing director snapped ruthlessly. You do not represent this bank anymore. You are officially terminated, Terrence. Fired with absolute immediate effect. Do not bother showing up to the office tomorrow morning because security has already been instructed to deny you entry. We are boxing up your desk and mailing your personal items to your house. Furthermore, I am personally calling every single institutional partner in my network. You are permanently blacklisted from Wall Street. You will never work in high finance ever again. The loud, decisive click of the call disconnecting echoed violently through the paralyzed dining room. The silence that followed was even more suffocating than before. Terrence's entire lucrative career, his immense wealth, his untouchable corporate identity, and his highly inflated ego had all been completely eradicated in exactly 2 minutes. Terrence's knees simply gave out. The man who had spent the evening boasting about moving billions of dollars and commanding the global market collapsed heavily onto the hardwood floor. He fell straight to his knees right beside Elijah's chair. The tailored fabric of his expensive custom suit bunched up awkwardly as he scrambled closer to my husband, abandoning every single shred of his pride. Elijah, please. Terrence begged, his voice completely breaking, as genuine tears of absolute desperation streamed down his pale face. I am so sorry. I swear to you, I am so incredibly sorry. I was just joking around. It was just harmless family banter. You know how competitive families can get. Please, Elijah, you have to call my managing director back. You have to tell them it was all a giant misunderstanding. I will lose my house. I will lose everything. I beg of you. Elijah looked down at the weeping, broken man groveling at his feet. The contrast between Terrence's previous roaring aggression and his current pathetic submission was incredibly stark. Elijah did not show a single ounce of pity. You threw a $12,000 bill at my chest and demanded I pay it to entertain yourself, Elijah stated calmly, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. You actively cheered when your wife boasted about trying to bankrupt my wife's art business. You threatened to have me permanently blacklisted from the tech industry. That does not sound like harmless family banter, Terrence. That sounds like a man revealing his true toxic character. Actions have severe permanent consequences. Seeing her husband's immense wealth and prestigious career vaporize into nothingness caused Valerie to experience a sudden violent shift in strategy. The arrogant corporate attorney who had mocked me all evening suddenly realized that her lavish Hamptons vacations, her designer wardrobes, and her elite social standing were entirely funded by the man currently weeping on the dining room floor. Survival instinct overtook her immense pride. Valerie rushed around the mahogany table, her high heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. She threw herself toward me, grabbing my hands with a desperate, frantic grip. Real tears ruined her perfectly applied makeup, streaking dark mascara down her cheeks. She morphed instantly into a terrified, vulnerable woman playing the ultimate victim card. Zuri, baby sister, please, Valerie cried out, her voice shaking with manufactured panic. You have to help us. Please tell your powerful husband to spare my husband. We are family Zuri. We grew up together. We share the same parents. We are blood. You cannot let him destroy our entire livelihood over a silly dinner conversation. Please, Zuri, you have a beautiful, kind heart. Show us some mercy. I stood perfectly still, letting her desperate, gripping hands hold mine. I looked deeply into the eyes of the older sister, who had spent my entire existence making me feel absolutely worthless. I saw no genuine remorse in her crying face. I only saw a selfish, terrified woman trying to save her own bank account. I felt no pity. The long years of absorbing her toxic abuse had completely hardened my heart against her manipulative tears. For the first time in 29 years, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound vindication. I did not need their validation anymore. The universe was finally balancing the scales, handing down the harsh, agonizing justice I had been quietly praying for since childhood. Every single insult, every overlooked achievement, every time they made me feel like an unwelcome stranger in my own home was being avenged in real time. I slowly and deliberately pulled my hands out of her frantic grasp. I looked at Valerie with pure, unadulterated ice. Blood, I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that forced her to step back. You want to talk about blood right now, Valerie? Were we blood last week when you used your corporate law firm to intimidate my biggest gallery client? Were we blood when you actively tried to completely bankrupt my small business just to force me into being your miserable, underpaid secretary? Were we blood when you sat at this exact table 10 minutes ago and laughed while your husband tried to publicly humiliate the man I love? Valerie opened her mouth, trying to form a defense, trying to spin her malicious actions into something acceptable, but she had absolutely nothing left to say. Her hypocrisy was laid bare for everyone in the room to witness. She had eagerly poured the gasoline and struck the match, hoping to watch me burn. Now she was crying because the wind had changed direction and the fire was consuming her instead. You do not care about blood, Valerie? I continued, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look me directly in the eyes. You only care about power. And now that you realize you have absolutely none left, you want to pretend we are loving sisters. I am not going to save you. You built your toxic life on destroying other people. Now you get to experience exactly how that feels. Elijah remained seated, his calm demeanor completely unshaken by the frantic begging happening around him. He smoothly reached down into his sleek leather briefcase resting beside his chair. He pulled out a slim, modern tablet. The screen was already glowing with an open corporate document. Elijah set the device on the polished mahogany table and smoothly slid it across the surface directly toward my weeping sister. The tablet stopped perfectly in front of Valerie, illuminating her tear-stained face with its bright digital glow. Speaking of businesses, Valerie, Elijah said, his commanding voice immediately drawing the entire room's attention away from the sobbing investment banker on the floor. You should probably look at this. Valerie hesitated, her hands shaking wildly as she reached out to touch the glowing screen. She looked down at the digital document displaying heavy legal text and an official corporate acquisition seal. Her eyes darted across the highlighted paragraphs, trying to comprehend the dense legal terminology, while her world was actively collapsing around her. My parents, Judge Winston and Camille, leaned forward in their chairs, their faces etched with absolute dread. Camille gripped her expensive pearl necklace so tightly that the string threatened to snap, scattering the precious jewels across the floor. Winston breathed heavily, his chest rising and falling in erratic spasms as his lifelong superiority complex violently dissolved. They had spent decades worshipping the ground Valerie and Terrence walked on, viewing them as the ultimate trophies to showcase to the elite Black community in Buckhead. Now their glorious trophies were being smashed into worthless, jagged pieces. They had just watched their favorite wealthy son-in-law get completely obliterated in a matter of seconds. Now they were forced to watch helplessly as my husband aimed his immense, terrifying corporate power directly at their golden child. The absolute destruction of their perfect high society illusion was happening relentlessly without any pause. Elijah sat back watching Valerie read the legal memo, waiting patiently for her world to completely shatter. The harsh electronic ring of Terrence's custom smartphone shattered the absolute silence of the private dining room like a blaring siren. The bright screen illuminated the dark mahogany table, flashing the name of the global managing director of his elite Wall Street investment bank. Terrence stared down at the glowing device as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. The aggressive arrogance he had paraded around the room had evaporated, leaving behind raw terror. Elijah casually leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands together with striking composure. He gestured lazily toward the vibrating phone resting near Terrence's trembling fingers. "You should answer that, Terrence." Elijah instructed, his voice radiating a cold, absolute authority that left no room for negotiation. "And make sure you put it on speaker. I believe the entire family would love to hear how your massive $20 million bonus is coming along." Terrence swallowed hard, his prominent Adam's apple bobbing nervously. His hand shook so violently that he fumbled the device twice before finally swiping the screen to accept the incoming call. He pressed the small speaker button with a pale, trembling finger. Before Terrence could utter a single greeting, the booming, enraged voice of his Wall Street managing director exploded through the small audio speaker, echoing aggressively off the velvet walls of the dining room. "Terrence, you absolute catastrophic idiot!" The managing director roared, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "What in the world did you do tonight? We just received an emergency priority call directly from the executive board of directors over at Apex Ledger. They are pulling our entire underwriting contract effectively immediately. They legally severed all ties with our banking institution, and they cited your specific abhorrent behavior as the primary cause." Terrence physically recoiled, as if he had been punched in the face. "Sir, please let me explain." Terrence stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "There has been a massive misunderstanding." "Shut your mouth and listen to me, you incompetent fool!" the managing director screamed, refusing to let Terrence defend himself. "The board representatives stated that you personally insulted and physically threatened their founder and chief executive officer at a private dinner tonight. Are you completely out of your mind? You just cost this investment bank hundreds of millions of dollars in guaranteed commissions. You destroyed a historic financial partnership because you could not control your pathetic, massive ego outside of business hours." My father, Judge Winston, slumped further down into his chair, his hands covering his face in utter disgrace. My mother, Camille, whimpered quietly, clutching the edge of the dining table as she watched her favorite wealthy son-in-law get verbally decimated on a public speakerphone. Valerie stood frozen, her designer dress suddenly looking entirely inadequate as the foundation of her luxurious lifestyle crumbled into dust right before her eyes. "Please, sir, I beg you," Terrence pleaded desperately, dropping all pretenses of dignity. "I did not know who he was. He was masquerading as a low-level data analyst. It was just a stupid family disagreement. I can fix this. Just let me apologize to the board." "You do not have the clearance to apologize to anyone," the managing director snapped ruthlessly. "You do not represent this bank anymore. You are officially terminated, Terrence. Fired with absolute immediate effect. Do not bother showing up to the office tomorrow morning, because security has already been instructed to deny you entry. We are boxing up your desk and mailing your personal items to your house. Furthermore, I am personally calling every single institutional partner in my network. You are permanently blacklisted from Wall Street. You will never work in high finance ever again." The loud, decisive click of the call disconnecting echoed violently through the paralyzed dining room. The silence that followed was even more suffocating than before. Terrence's entire lucrative career, his immense wealth, his untouchable corporate identity, and his highly inflated ego had all been completely eradicated in exactly 2 minutes. Terrence's knees simply gave out. The man who had spent the evening boasting about moving billions of dollars and commanding the global market collapsed heavily onto the hardwood floor. He fell straight to his knees right beside Elijah's chair. The tailored fabric of his expensive custom suit bunched up awkwardly as he scrambled closer to my husband, abandoning every single shred of his pride. "Elijah, please," Terrence begged, his voice completely breaking, as genuine tears of absolute desperation streamed down his pale face. "I am so sorry. I swear to you, I am so incredibly sorry. I was just joking around. It was just harmless family banter. You know how competitive families can get. Please, Elijah, you have to call my managing director back. You have to tell them it was all a giant misunderstanding. I will lose my house. I will lose everything. I beg of you." Elijah looked down at the weeping broken man groveling at his feet. The contrast between Terrence's previous aggression and his current pathetic submission was stark. Elijah did not show a single ounce of pity. "You threw a $12,000 bill at my chest and demanded I pay it to entertain yourself," Elijah stated calmly, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You actively cheered when your wife boasted about trying to bankrupt my wife's art business. You threatened to have me permanently blacklisted from the tech industry. That does not sound like harmless family banter, Terrence. That sounds like a man revealing his true toxic character. Actions have severe permanent consequences." Seeing her husband's immense wealth and prestigious career vaporize into nothingness caused Valerie to experience a sudden violent shift in strategy. The arrogant corporate attorney who had mocked me all evening suddenly realized that her lavish Hamptons vacations, her designer wardrobes, and her elite social standing were entirely funded by the man currently weeping on the dining room floor. Survival instinct overtook her immense pride. Valerie rushed around the mahogany table, her high heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. She threw herself toward me, grabbing my hands with a desperate, frantic grip. Real tears ruined her perfectly applied makeup, streaking dark mascara down her cheeks. She morphed instantly into a terrified, vulnerable woman playing the ultimate victim card. "Nia, baby sister, please," Valerie cried out, her voice shaking with manufactured panic. "You have to help us. Please tell your powerful husband to spare my husband. We are family, Nia. We grew up together. We share the same parents. We are blood. You cannot let him destroy our entire livelihood over a silly dinner conversation. Please, Nia, you have a beautiful, kind heart. Show us some mercy." I stood perfectly still, letting her desperate, gripping hands hold mine. I looked deeply into the eyes of the older sister, who had spent my entire existence making me feel absolutely worthless. I saw no genuine remorse in her crying face. I only saw a selfish, terrified woman trying to save her own bank account. I felt no pity. The long years of absorbing her toxic abuse had completely hardened my heart against her manipulative tears. For the first time in 29 years, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound vindication. I did not need their validation anymore. The universe was finally balancing the scales, handing down the harsh, agonizing justice I had been quietly praying for since childhood. Every single insult, every overlooked achievement, every time they made me feel like an unwelcome stranger in my own home was being avenged in real time. I slowly and deliberately pulled my hands out of her frantic grasp. I looked at Valerie with pure, unadulterated ice. "Blood," I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that forced her to step back. "You want to talk about blood right now, Valerie? Were we blood last week when you used your corporate law firm to intimidate my biggest gallery client? Were we blood when you actively tried to completely bankrupt my small business just to force me into being your miserable, underpaid secretary? Were we blood when you sat at this exact table 10 minutes ago and laughed while your husband tried to publicly humiliate the man I love?" Valerie opened her mouth, trying to form a defense, trying to spin her malicious actions into something acceptable, but she had absolutely nothing left to say. Her hypocrisy was laid bare for everyone in the room to witness. She had eagerly poured the gasoline and struck the match, hoping to watch me burn. Now she was crying because the wind had changed direction and the fire was consuming her instead. "You do not care about blood, Valerie." I continued stepping closer to her, forcing her to look me directly in the eyes. "You only care about power. And now that you realize you have absolutely none left, you want to pretend we are loving sisters. I am not going to save you. You built your toxic life on destroying other people. Now you get to experience exactly how that feels." "I am not going to save you," I said coldly. Elijah remained seated, his calm demeanor completely unshaken by the frantic begging happening around him. He smoothly reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a tablet. Elijah smoothly slid it to her. "Look, Valerie, look." The heavy silence following the catastrophic phone call was broken by the frantic rustling of expensive silk. My mother Camille, realizing that her entire worldview had just been brutally flipped upside down, instantly shifted her survival strategy. She was a master of high society manipulation, and she immediately attempted to rewrite the entire narrative of the evening. She pushed her chair back and glided around the mahogany table, approaching my husband, with her arms outstretched and a sickeningly sweet motherly smile plastered across her deeply panicked face. She was desperately trying to save her own luxurious and comfortable lifestyle now. Elijah darling, Camille cooed, her voice completely devoid of the venom she had spewed just 10 minutes earlier. We are just so incredibly proud of you. You have to understand that tonight was simply a stress test. My father, Judge Winston, quickly stepped up right beside her, aggressively nodding his head in eager agreement. Yes, absolutely a stress test, my father chimed in, smoothing his expensive tie with shaking hands. We needed to be absolutely certain that you were strong enough to protect our precious daughter from the ruthless realities of the corporate world. We were just testing your resolve. Camille reached out, attempting to place her manicured hands on Elijah's broad shoulders, but he smoothly leaned back, denying her the physical contact. We always knew you were special. Elijah, my mother continued, completely ignoring his clear rejection. We knew you were hiding a brilliant secret behind that quiet demeanor. We just wanted to push you to see your true potential. You passed the test with flying colors. We do officially welcome you into the true black elite of Atlanta. You are exactly the kind of powerful corporate titan this prestigious family deserves to have sitting at our dining table. I sat there listening to the staggering hypocrisy spilling from my mother's mouth. For 29 years, I had swallowed my pride and accepted their emotional abuse. I had allowed them to treat me like a worthless outsider in my own home. But hearing them attempt to steal credit for my husband's astronomical success, claiming their vicious cruelty was actually a loving test, was the absolute final straw. The heavy dam inside me completely broke. I could no longer stay silent while they tried to gaslight us into believing their toxic behavior was rooted in parental love and deep concern. A test, I asked, my voice starting low, but ringing with decades of suppressed anger. I stood up from my chair, pushing it back with enough force to make my family flinch. Was it a loving stress test when I desperately begged you to simply co-sign my student loans so I could afford my art history degree, and you flatly refused? You told me I was dead to you if I did not attend law school like Valerie. I had to work 3 exhausting jobs, scrubbing floors and serving coffee, just to pay my tuition and survive college alone. My mother took a sudden step back, her fake smile trembling slightly under the weight of my direct confrontation. Zuri, please do not cause a scene right now, Camille whispered nervously, glancing at the closed mahogany doors. We were simply teaching you independence. We just wanted you to learn the value of hard work. Independence. I fired back, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look at the immense pain she had caused me. Is that what you call it? Because I distinctly remember you buying Valerie a brand new Mercedes-Benz, paid in full in cash that same week. Yao bought her that luxury vehicle the very same week she passed the bar exam, while I was struggling to buy groceries. I remember you funding Terrence's lavish bachelor party, while telling me I had to move out of the house because my art supplies were taking up too much valuable space in the guest room. You never tested Valerie. You never tested Terrence. You worshipped them because they fed your toxic obsession with status, while you starved me of basic parental love. You chose your public reputation over your own youngest daughter every single time you had the chance. Valerie looked away, completely unable to meet my eyes, while Terrence remained broken and sobbing quietly on the dining room floor. I turned my attention fully to my parents, refusing to let them escape the ugly truth of their blatant favoritism. You did not test Elijah, I stated firmly, my voice echoing off the velvet walls. You absolutely hated him from the start. You mocked his clothes. You mocked his job. You called him a keyboard pusher and a data boy. You humiliated him repeatedly tonight, trying to force him to pay a $12,000 wine bill for you. You only welcome him into your elite circle now because he has enough money to buy your entire existence. You are not proud of him. You are just terrified of his power. My father, Judge Winston, could not handle being spoken to with such raw defiance by his scapegoat daughter. His massive ego demanded absolute submission from his children at all times. He stepped in front of my mother, puffing out his chest and drawing himself up to his full imposing height. He desperately attempted to use his retired judicial authority and patriarchal power to force me back into submission. "You listen to me right now, Zuri Judge." Winston bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red with defensive fury. "You will respect your mother, and you will respect my authority in this room. You should be down on your knees thanking us every single day of your life for the unparalleled upbringing we generously provided you. We raised you in a multi-million-dollar Buckhead mansion. We clothed you, we fed you, and we gave you a highly prestigious last name that opens doors all across this state. You owe us your absolute gratitude and your unwavering loyalty." My father swept his arm aggressively across the room, gesturing wildly to the luxurious surroundings of the country club, as if he personally owned the entire building. "I am a highly respected retired judge in this major city," Winston boasted loudly, his voice dripping with the ultimate illusion of supreme class. "I sit on the board of 5 different influential charities. Your mother is the president of the most exclusive social clubs in Atlanta. We possess an unshakable wealth and a completely bulletproof status in this high society. We are the absolute definition of elite success in this modern world. Elijah may have acquired some technology money recently, but he still needs our social capital to truly matter in the upper echelons of this city." Winston continued, his delusion blinding him to reality. "We are Atlanta royalty, Zuri. Money comes and goes, but our family legacy is permanent. You and your husband should be honored that we are willing to overlook your previous disrespect and welcome you back into the fold." I stared at my father, completely disgusted by his arrogant delusion. He truly believed that his hollow social club memberships made him vastly superior to a global tech billionaire. I was desperately clinging to an illusion of high society grandeur that was rapidly crumbling all around him. The heavy, tense silence returned to the private dining room. I waited for my father to finish his desperate, egotistical rant. I wanted him to put all of his fake pride on full display before it was utterly destroyed. Then Elijah smoothly broke the heavy silence. Elijah did not yell. He did not raise his voice or stand up to match my father's highly aggressive physical posture. Instead, my husband simply shook his head slowly and began to laugh softly out loud. It was a cold, dark, genuinely amused sound that sent a visible shiver straight down my mother's spine. "What wealth?" Winston Elijah asked, his voice incredibly calm but sharp as a surgical scalpel. My father froze, his boastful posture faltering instantly. "What are you talking about?" Winston stammered defensively. "I am a remarkably wealthy, powerful man." Elijah leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table, clasping his hands together. "You have not had real money in 10 agonizing years," Winston Elijah stated, projecting his commanding voice clearly so every single person in the room could hear the devastating truth. "You sit here demanding intense gratitude for raising your daughter in a mansion. Why do you not tell your golden children the actual truth about your precious Buckhead estate?" Camille let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her face in sheer panic. "Elijah, please," she begged desperately, abandoning her elite persona entirely. "Please do not say it out loud right now." Elijah ignored her completely. "Tell them about the 3 secret mortgages on the Buckhead mansion," Winston Elijah commanded ruthlessly. "Tell them about the massive Chapter 11 bankruptcy you have been desperately hiding from the elite country club." Camille let out a sharp gasp. Her hands flew to her chest, and she recoiled from the table. She looked frantically toward the closed mahogany doors, terrified that the country club staff might be listening to her secret being exposed. "No," Camille hissed frantically. "Keep your voice down, Elijah. People will hear you. We are not bankrupt. We are restructuring our liquid assets. That is what wealthy people do. It is a sophisticated financial strategy that you simply do not understand." Winston slammed his hand on the table. "You are stepping way out of line, boy," Winston growled. "You think you can waltz in here and accuse me of financial ruin? I am a judge. My credit is impeccable. My financial portfolio is robust and managed by the top wealth advisors in Atlanta. How dare you fabricate these lies about my estate just to embarrass us in front of Terrence and Valerie?" Elijah did not blink at their denial. He smoothly reached back into his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of banking documents bound by a black binder clip. He dropped the heavy stack onto the center of the mahogany table. The loud thud made my parents jump in their seats. "I do not need to fabricate anything," Winston Elijah said calmly, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "The bank executives were happy to hand over your financial history when my private equity firm acquired your debt portfolio. Your financial portfolio is not robust. It is a disastrous crater of reckless spending and chronic vanity." Elijah slid the first document across the table. It stopped in front of my father. "Let us review the numbers," Elijah suggested coldly. "You drained your judicial retirement savings 7 years ago. You blew through millions of dollars to maintain a fake high society lifestyle that you could not afford. You spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on designer clothes, luxury cars you leased but claimed to own, and tables at charity galas, just so you could take pictures with the mayor." Camille stared at the document, her eyes wide with sheer panic. She opened her mouth to argue, but Elijah cut her off immediately, sliding a second document across the polished wood. "You took out a second mortgage on the Buckhead mansion 5 years ago to pay for Valerie's wedding." Elijah continued, exposing their shame. "You wanted to impress Terrence's Wall Street family, so you leveraged the only real asset you had left. When that money dried up, you took out a third mortgage. You have been shuffling credit card debt from one account to another for half a decade, just to pay your country club membership dues. You are drowning in a financial disaster." Valerie looked from the documents to our parents, her mouth hanging open. "You took out another mortgage for my wedding?" Valerie asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You told me you paid for everything in cash from your trust fund. You said the family estate was paid off." Winston avoided his daughter's gaze, staring down at the table with a look of defeat. Camille covered her face with her hands, quietly sobbing into her silk sleeves. The grand illusion of their elite social status was being ripped to shreds. I sat there, watching the destruction of their fake empire. For my life, they had made me feel like a worthless peasant because I did not care about their designer labels. They treated me like a disappointment because I chose a simple, honest life over their obsession with prestige. Now the ugly truth was laid bare. Their prestige was nothing but a hollow lie funded by crippling debt. "You are $4 million in debt," Winston Elijah stated, delivering the fatal blow with precision. "You have missed your last 6 mortgage payments. The primary lending bank officially issued a notice of default 3 weeks ago. You have been checking your mail in secret, trying to hide the final notices from your social circle." Winston's face crumpled. He looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the trapdoor to open. "The bank was going to foreclose on your Buckhead mansion tomorrow morning." Elijah continued, his dark eyes locking onto my father's defeated face. "The sheriff's deputies were scheduled to arrive at your front gate at 9 o'clock to evict you and change the locks. You were going to be thrown out into the street." Camille let out a loud, agonizing wail. "No," she sobbed frantically, shaking her head. "No, please, God, no. The neighbors cannot see that. The social club will banish me. I will be ruined." "But they are not coming tomorrow morning," Elijah added smoothly, his tone shifting into something far more dangerous. "The bank canceled the foreclosure order this afternoon." My parents looked up, a flash of hope igniting in their tear-filled eyes. Winston practically lunged across the table. "You stopped it!" Winston gasped, his voice cracking with relief. "You paid off the bank. You saved the house, Elijah. I knew you were a good man. I knew you would not let your own family face such a terrible public humiliation. We will pay you back." Elijah smiled, but it was a cold expression that instantly extinguished their hope. "I did not pay off the bank to save you," Winston Elijah clarified, his voice dripping with pure ice. "I stepped in because my private equity firm bought your massive debt portfolio at a discount this afternoon. I now own every single one of your mortgages. I own the massive debt on your luxury cars. I am your sole remaining creditor." The heavy realization crashed down upon my parents like a ton of bricks. They were utterly at the mercy of the man they had spent the evening degrading and humiliating. The man they called a pathetic keyboard pusher now held the power to destroy their lives. Terrence, who had been kneeling on the floor in a state of shock, suddenly snapped out of his daze. The investment banker slowly pushed himself up from the hardwood floor, His face was twisted into a mask of pure fury. Terrence stared at my parents, his eyes wide with a realization. He pointed a trembling finger at my father. "You lied to me!" Terrence screamed, his voice breaking into a frantic pitch. Winston flinched, shrinking back into his leather chair. "Terrence, please," Winston stammered, holding up his hands. "Let us not discuss private financial matters right now. We can handle this internally as a family." "Family," Terrence roared, lunging forward and slamming his hands onto the mahogany table. "You told me you needed a bridge loan. You told me you were experiencing a temporary liquidity issue because your assets were tied up in a commercial real estate deal. You begged me for cash." Valerie turned to her husband, her eyes wide with fresh panic. "Terrence, what did you do?" Valerie demanded, grabbing his arm. "What is he talking about?" Terrence violently shook off her hand, keeping his furious gaze locked on my shrinking parents. "He borrowed $500,000 from me last week," Terrence screamed, pointing at my father. "He swore to me on his judicial honor that he would pay me back with interest by next Friday. He said he just needed the cash to finalize a 40th anniversary party to show off to the mayor." My mother let out another loud, agonizing sob, burying her face deeper into her hands. The ugly truth was finally exposed. They had stolen from their golden son-in-law just to fund this extravagant dinner party. They had knowingly taken his money to pay for the vintage wine, the private dining room, and the custom floral arrangements, all while knowing they were bankrupt. "You stole my money to throw a fake vanity party!" Terrence bellowed, his face turning bright red with rage. "You knew you were losing the house. You knew you were broke. I just lost my career. I just lost my Wall Street bonus. I am blacklisted from the financial sector. And you stole $500,000 from my personal savings to buy vintage Bordeaux wine to impress people who do not care about you." The toxic alliance of the Golden family snapped into a million jagged pieces. Terrence lunged across the table, grabbing my father's suit collar. Winston shouted in panic, trying to push the younger, heavier man away. Valerie screamed at her husband to stop, frantically trying to pull him backward while crying about her ruined legal career. I sat still beside my husband, watching the implosion of the people who had made my life a living hell. They were no longer the elite royalty of Atlanta society. They were just desperate, angry frauds, viciously tearing each other apart over money they did not have. "You ruined me," Terrence screamed, shaking my father violently. "I gave you my money because you promised me connections. I gave you my money because you said you were royalty. You are a pathetic broke fraud, Winston. Give me my money back right now." Winston struggled to breathe, his face turning purple under Terrence's grip. "I do not have it," Winston choked out desperately, trying to pry Terrence's hands off his collar. "We spent it all on the deposits for the party. We had to maintain the image, Terrence. You of all people should understand how important the image is." Terrence let out a guttural scream of pure despair. He shoved my father backward, causing Winston to crash heavily into his chair. Terrence paced frantically back and forth, running his shaking hands over his head. The realization that he was ruined professionally and had just been robbed blind by his own in-laws sent him into a psychological spiral. Valerie dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. "We are going to lose everything," Valerie wailed loudly. "The Hamptons' house, the cars, my firm. It is all gone. We are ruined because of you." She pointed a furious, trembling finger at our mother. "You made me do this. You made me sabotage Nia. You made us spend all our money trying to impress your stupid fake friends." The room descended into deafening chaos. The facade of the Buckhead elite was shattered completely. Now everyone stared in absolute horror. This nightmare was entirely real. All their wealth was gone. The fake prestige was dead. They had nothing left. We watched them suffer. It was glorious to see. They screamed at each other loudly. They blamed each other violently. They cried, begging for mercy. They demanded their money back immediately. The elegant dining room became a war zone. I smiled, feeling totally free. The truth had set me free. My husband held my hand securely. He protected me from their toxic greed. We stood together, strong and united. They remained broken on the floor. Their fake empire was gone forever. They had destroyed themselves perfectly. They fell victim to their own vanity and greed. Nobody cared about their tears anymore. We let them weep alone in the dark room. We walked away knowing the absolute victory was ours. They tried to stop us. We ignored their desperate pleas completely. We moved forward with our lives. Our future was incredibly bright and completely secured. They were left to face their ugly reality. A reality they created through lies and deceit. They had stolen from everyone. Now they had absolutely nobody. Their social circle would abandon them instantly. They would be outcasts in Atlanta. They would lose their country club memberships. They would be forced to sell everything they owned. We knew they would suffer, and we knew they absolutely deserved it. It was the perfect revenge. Sweet, beautiful justice had finally been served to those monsters. We watched the final curtain fall. We felt immense satisfaction knowing they were completely destroyed. My heart felt incredibly light. The heavy burden of their expectations was lifted. I was free to be myself, free to love my husband without their judgment, free to curate art without their interference, free to build my own legacy. We left them crying and screaming. We walked into the warm Atlanta night. Our luxury car was waiting for us. The driver opened the door respectfully. We stepped inside the plush interior. The engine purred to life smoothly. We drove away from the chaos. We drove away from the toxicity. We drove away from the fake elite. We headed toward our real future. A future built on honesty and true love. A future built on immense wealth and power. A future where we made the rules. A future where we were the true royalty of Atlanta. And they were just a forgotten memory, a cautionary tale of greed and vanity, a story of how the mighty had fallen. We laughed together in the car. It was a genuine happy laugh. The night was young and ours. We had won the ultimate battle. We had reclaimed our lives completely, and we had done it together, side by side forever and always. A perfect team, an unstoppable force, the new rulers of the city. We drove into the starlit night, leaving the ruins behind us, never to return to that miserable place, never to speak to those toxic people again. Our new life was just beginning. It was a beautiful, victorious new beginning for us both. We were unstoppable. We were powerful. We were deeply in love. And we were entirely, completely free. The toxic alliance of our golden family snapped into a million jagged pieces right before my eyes. Terrence lunged across the polished mahogany table with the aggressive speed of a desperate cornered animal. He grabbed my father by his expensive suit collar, shaking the older man with violent, unpredictable rage. Winston shouted in pure panic, throwing his hands up in a futile attempt to defend himself. He desperately tried to pry the younger, heavier man away from his throat, but Terrence's grip was fueled by the absolute destruction of his entire existence. "You rhined me, you pathetic old fraud!" Terrence screamed, his voice breaking into a frantic, high-pitched roar that echoed harshly off the velvet walls. "I gave you my money because you promised me elite social connections. I gave you my money because you swore you were true Atlanta royalty. You are a completely broke, pathetic liar, Winston. Give me my money back right now." Winston struggled to breathe, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple under Terrence's aggressive grip. "I do not have it," Winston choked out, frantically swatting at Terrence's large hands. "We spent it all on the deposits for the party. We had to maintain the image, Terrence. You of all people should understand exactly how important the public image is in this city." Terrence let out a loud, guttural scream of pure, unadulterated despair. He shoved my father backward with tremendous force, causing Winston to crash heavily into his tufted leather chair. The heavy chair tipped dangerously backward, but somehow remained upright. Terrence paced frantically back and forth across the dining room, running his shaking hands over his head. The horrific realization that he was ruined professionally and had just been robbed blind by his own trusted in-laws sent him into a complete psychological spiral. "You stole my money to throw a fake vanity party to impress the mayor," Terrence bellowed, his face turning bright red with intense, blinding rage. "You knew you were losing the house tomorrow morning. You knew you were entirely bankrupt. I just lost my prestigious career. I just lost my massive Wall Street bonus. I am permanently blacklisted from the entire financial sector. And you stole $500,000 from my personal savings to buy vintage Bordeaux wine to impress superficial people who do not even care about you." While Terrence was having a complete mental breakdown, Valerie suddenly turned her venomous rage directly toward our mother. The arrogant corporate attorney, who had spent her entire life basking in Camille's favoritism, now looked at her mother with pure, unadulterated hatred. Valerie lunged forward, grabbing Camille tightly by the shoulders and shaking her violently. "We are going to lose absolutely everything," Valerie wailed loudly, her perfect designer facade completely destroyed by panic. "The Hamptons house, the luxury cars, my entire law firm. It is all gone. We are ruined because of you." Valerie pointed a furious, trembling finger right in Camille's face. "You made me do this!" Valerie shrieked hysterically, tears streaming down her face. "You made me sabotage Zuri. You made us spend all our money trying to impress your stupid fake friends in high society. You convinced me that destroying my sister would secure my place as the ultimate successor to the family estate. You manipulated me into risking my entire legal license just so you could maintain absolute control over both of your daughters. There is no family estate, Camille. There is no money left. You are a disgusting fraud and you dragged me down into the dirt with you." Camille stumbled away from her furious daughter, her eyes wide with sheer blinding terror. The grand illusion of her elite social status had been brutally ripped to shreds, and she had absolutely nowhere left to hide. Instead of apologizing to her family or trying to comfort her weeping daughter, Camille dropped heavily to her knees on the hardwood floor. She buried her face in her hands and began weeping uncontrollably, but she was not crying for her family. She was crying for her social calendar. "What will my sorority sisters say?" Camille sobbed frantically, rocking back and forth on the floor like a wounded child. "What will the women in my exclusive social clubs think of me? The Lynx will absolutely banish me from their ranks. I will be completely ruined in Atlanta society. I will be a total laughingstock. They will never let me host another charity gala. How can I possibly show my face at the country club ever again?" Even as her family was violently destroying itself right in front of her. My mother cared more about her superficial social clubs than the fact that her husband was bankrupt and her children were ruined. Her toxic obsession with appearances had finally consumed her entire reality, leaving her weeping on the floor over the permanent loss of her fake prestige. I sat perfectly still beside my husband, watching the explosive implosion of the people who had made my life a living hell. They were no longer the elite royalty of Atlanta society. They were just desperate, angry frauds viciously tearing each other apart over money they did not have and status they never truly earned. The elegant dining room had completely transformed into a brutal, chaotic war zone. Elijah did not move a single muscle. He simply leaned back in his leather chair, watching the chaos unfold with the detached calmness of a powerful king, watching a peasant rebellion crush itself. He had effortlessly orchestrated their complete destruction without ever raising his voice or losing his temper. He simply presented them with the harsh, undeniable reality of their own toxic choices and let their massive, fragile egos do the rest of the devastating work. I felt a profound cinematic sense of catharsis washing over me. For 29 agonizing years, I had been the designated family scapegoat. I had absorbed their constant criticism, their cruel comparisons, and their blatant favoritism. I had spent countless lonely nights wondering why I was never good enough to earn their love or basic respect. But watching them scream and cry and violently blame each other, I finally realized the liberating truth. I was never the problem. They were completely poisoned by their own greed and unyielding arrogance. We did not have to lift another finger. We did not have to shout or argue or defend ourselves anymore. The toxic family dynamic they had weaponized against me for decades was now actively devouring them alive right before our eyes. Terrence was still screaming loudly at Winston, demanding his $500,000 back and threatening immediate physical violence. Valerie was throwing her expensive crystal water glass against the velvet wall, shattering it into jagged pieces as she mourned her lost legal career. Camille was wailing pathetically about her permanently ruined reputation. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated justice. The universe had finally balanced the scales, and I was sitting in the front row, watching the spectacular, beautiful finale. I looked at Elijah, and he turned his head to look directly at me. His dark eyes were soft and filled with genuine, fierce, protective love. He had promised to cover the table tonight, and he had delivered far more than just a paid dinner bill. He had handed me the absolute glorious freedom I had been craving my entire life. Suddenly, the chaotic noise in the private room shifted. My mother Camille stopped rocking back and forth on the floor. Her tear-streaked face snapped up and her wide, desperate eyes locked directly onto me. The sheer panic in her expression was suddenly replaced by a frantic, calculating glimmer of hope. She had remembered something important. She had remembered the exact reason she had mocked me just an hour ago. Camille scrambled across the hardwood floor, ignoring the shattered glass from the champagne flute she had dropped earlier. She crawled desperately toward my chair, her expensive designer dress dragging pitifully along the ground. She reached out with trembling manicured hands and forcefully grabbed the hem of my dress, clutching the fabric as if it were her only lifeline in a raging storm. "Zuri, my beautiful daughter," Camille cried out, her voice shaking with wild, intense desperation. "Zuri, my sweet, precious girl, you have to help us. You have to save this family." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire existence making me feel absolutely worthless. She was gripping my dress, looking up at me with fake motherly affection masking her greedy intentions. "You have that $5 million contract!" Camille shrieked frantically, her eyes wild with greedy anticipation. "You said the money cleared your bank account this morning. $5 million, Zuri. That is more than enough to fix everything. Give it to us. Please, baby girl, give us the money. You can pay off the house right now. You can pay off Terrence so he leaves your father alone. Save your family from total destruction. We are your blood, Zuri. You owe us your life. Save us right now." I stared down at her ruined makeup and messy hair. The perfect society lady was completely gone. She was acting like a starving animal begging for scraps from the very daughter she had spent 29 years trying to emotionally starve. It was a pathetic display of ultimate weakness. She loved my newly acquired bank account. Her sudden affection was entirely transactional. I felt a cold surge of absolute power rush through my veins. The mighty matriarch of the Winston family was literally on her knees groveling at my feet for survival. I took a deep, slow breath, preparing to deliver my final judgment to this toxic woman. I knew exactly what I needed to say to her now. I looked down at the desperate woman groveling on the floor. Camille Winston, the self-proclaimed Queen of Atlanta High Society, was currently weeping over my shoes like a completely broken peasant. Her manicured fingers dug tightly into the expensive silk fabric of my dress. She looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks and wild, frantic eyes, begging for financial salvation. I did not feel a single drop of sympathy. I felt only a profound, freezing emptiness, where my daughterly affection used to reside. I slowly reached down toward her shaking hands. I did not reach out to comfort her or pull her into a loving embrace. Instead, I firmly and deliberately peeled her fingers off my dress one by one. I stepped back, creating a cold physical distance between us. "Do not touch me, Camille," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute icy authority across the ruined dining room. "You lost the right to touch me. The day you decided my artistic passion was a shameful disease that needed to be cured by your endless emotional abuse." Camille let out a pathetic whimper, staring at her empty hands. "Zuri, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "We are your family. You have that massive $5 million contract. You can save us right now. You can pay off Terrence and save the Buckhead estate. You have the money." I shook my head slowly, letting a cold, sharp smile form on my lips. "You really do not understand anything, do you?" I asked her. "You are so blinded by your own toxic greed that you cannot even see the beautiful irony of your destruction. That $5 million contract you are begging me for right now is not with some random Silicon Valley technology conglomerate." I paused, letting the heavy silence build in the room before dropping the ultimate devastating truth. "That massive contract is with Apex Ledger." The realization hit Camille like a physical blow to the chest. Her eyes darted from me to Elijah and back again. "Yes, Camille," I continued ruthlessly. "Elijah hired me. He is the one paying me $5 million to curate his global headquarters. When my own mother called me a useless failure and actively tried to bankrupt my small business, my husband stepped up. He believed in my art. He believed in my vision. He believed in my raw talent when this entire family treated me like a pathetic joke. He invested his immense wealth into my future, while you were busy stealing $500,000 from your other son-in-law just to buy vintage wine. Elijah saw my true worth when you only saw a scapegoat. You want me to take the money my husband gave me to build my dream career and use it to bail out the very people who relentlessly mocked him all night. You want me to finance the fake luxurious lifestyle of the people who just demanded he pay a $12,000 dinner bill. The sheer unadulterated audacity of your request is genuinely mind-boggling. Valerie, who was still crying in the corner, suddenly stopped. She stared at me with pure venomous jealousy, realizing that my success was entirely funded and protected by the billionaire she had just threatened. Terrence remained frozen on the floor, his eyes wide with absolute despair. I turned my attention to all four of them, delivering the final verdict they desperately needed to hear. Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once, I stated firmly, my voice carrying the unshakable weight of absolute finality. I will never set myself on fire just to keep your pathetic illusions of grandeur warm. I am entirely done playing the compliant victim in your twisted, narcissistic games. For 29 agonizing years, I desperately craved your love and basic approval. I twisted myself into knots trying to find a way to make you proud of me. But tonight I finally realized that your approval is completely worthless. It is as fake and bankrupt as your secret bank accounts. You are getting absolutely nothing from me, I declared ruthlessly. You will not get a single penny from my business accounts, and you will certainly not get a single dime from my husband. You are going to face the brutal reality of your toxic choices. You will have to pack up your designer clothes and sell whatever cheap leased luxury cars you have left. You will have to learn how to live the very same ordinary life you spent the entire evening loudly mocking Elijah for. You will have to go out into the real world and get actual jobs. You will have to learn how to survive without your country club memberships, your fancy galas, and your fake social prestige. You are going to lose everything tonight, and you completely deserve every single agonizing second of this spectacular downfall. My words echoed loudly in the silent room, stripping away the last remaining shreds of their dignity. For my entire life, I had been repeatedly told that my artistic pursuits were a humiliating waste of time. I had been constantly reminded that I lacked the cutthroat corporate ambition that made Valerie so special. I was the family embarrassment because I refused to worship at the altar of high society status. Yet here I was, standing victorious, while their highly curated empire collapsed into dust. You built your entire identities around the false idea that wealth makes you superior to everyone else. I continued letting my voice resonate with pure, undeniable power. You measured human worth by job titles and designer labels. You treated the restaurant staff terribly tonight because you genuinely believed you were above them. You treated Elijah terribly tonight because you genuinely believed he was beneath you. But your immense arrogance blinded you to reality. The universe has a beautiful way of balancing the scales, and tonight it balanced them perfectly. You are completely exposed. Your fake royalty is dead. My words hit them like physical strikes. Camille collapsed completely, sobbing into the hardwood floor. Valerie covered her ears, unable to handle the devastating truth of her new impoverished reality. Terrence just stared at the wall, completely broken, knowing he was permanently blacklisted from the financial sector. But my father, Judge Winston, refused to surrender his massive, fragile ego. The idea of living an ordinary life was a fate worse than death for a man so thoroughly consumed by his own arrogance. Winston aggressively pushed himself up from his tufted leather chair. His face was a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. He puffed out his chest desperately, trying to summon the imposing judicial authority that had defined his entire existence. He refused to accept that a man he viewed as a simple data clerk had completely outsmarted him. "You think you can just crush us?" Winston bellowed, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly at Elijah. "You think because you have a fancy technology company that you are completely untouchable in my city. I am a former judge. I still have immense political pull in Georgia. I have powerful connections across the entire state legislature. I will call the mayor tonight. I will call the governor tomorrow morning. I will personally have all of Apex Ledger's state tax breaks permanently revoked. I will launch aggressive municipal investigations into your corporate practices. I will utterly destroy your entire company in Georgia, Elijah. You will deeply regret the day you ever crossed the powerful Winston family. You will lose your entire billionaire fortune when my political allies are finished ripping your startup to shreds. Winston stood there breathing heavily, believing he had just delivered a fatal checkmate. He truly thought his empty political threats would finally force my powerful husband to back down and submit to his patriarchal authority. He expected Elijah to cower and apologize for exposing their financial ruin. Elijah did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of fear or intimidation at my father's desperate screaming. Instead, a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across Elijah's handsome face. The absolute unshakable confidence radiating from my husband was magnificent to witness. He possessed the supreme tranquility of a man who held all the winning cards in his hand. Elijah calmly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a single piece of neatly folded paper, holding it gently between his fingers. The entire room went completely still, waiting for his response. "I was hoping you would say that." Winston Elijah replied smoothly, his voice cutting through the thick tension like a sharp blade. "I have been waiting very patiently for this exact moment to finally arrive." Terrence stared down at the black leather folder resting on his lap, as if it were a live explosive. His hands shook so violently that the folder slipped, falling onto the expensive rug between his polished shoes. He did not reach down to pick it up. He simply stared at the floor, his mouth opening and closing, without producing a single sound. The arrogant, boastful investment banker, who had spent the entire evening loudly bragging about securing a $20 million bonus, was now completely paralyzed by a $12,000 dinner bill. He had absolutely no way to pay it. His corporate cards were undoubtedly frozen by his former firm, and his personal accounts were drained to maintain his fake luxury lifestyle. Valerie let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She scrambled away from her husband, pressing her back against the velvet wall, looking at the leather folder with pure horror. She knew exactly what this meant. The prestigious country club did not offer payment plans. They demanded immediate settlement of all private dining accounts. If they could not produce a valid credit card right now, the club management would gladly summon the local police to handle the theft of services. The ultimate high society humiliation was staring them right in the face. I did not stay to watch them beg the waiter for mercy. I turned my back on the pathetic and walked smoothly toward the heavy mahogany doors. Elijah was waiting for me there. He offered his arm and I took it, feeling the solid, reassuring warmth of his presence. We stepped out of the private dining room together and let the heavy doors pull shut behind us, sealing my toxic family inside the miserable prison of their own making. The walk through the main corridor of the exclusive country club felt entirely different than our arrival. Earlier this evening, the staff had looked at us with polite dismissal, clearly recognizing that we were not the ones funding the extravagant anniversary celebration. Now the atmosphere had drastically shifted. The country club general manager was standing near the main entrance, furiously typing on a tablet. He must have just received the breaking financial news regarding Apex Ledger and the true identity of the man walking through his lobby. As we approached, the general manager shoved his tablet under his arm and practically sprinted forward to open the heavy glass entrance doors for us. He bowed his head respectfully, refusing to make direct eye contact with my husband. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," the manager said, his voice trembling slightly with sudden, overwhelming deference. "It was an absolute honor to have you dine with us tonight. Please let me know if you require your private driver to pull the vehicle around to the front portico." Elijah barely acknowledged the panicked manager. He gave a single curt nod as we stepped out into the crisp, cool Atlanta night. We did not walk toward the modest rented sedan we had arrived in. That vehicle had served its purpose for the evening stress test. Instead, we walked toward the pristine midnight black Maybach, idling quietly near the curb. A professional driver in an immaculate suit stepped out immediately, opening the rear door for us with practiced efficiency. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, and Elijah slid in right beside me. The heavy door closed, shutting out the noise of the city completely. As the powerful engine purred to life, and the car glided smoothly down the long, manicured driveway of the country club, I let out a long, deep breath. The suffocating weight of 29 years of constant criticism, emotional manipulation, and blatant favoritism evaporated entirely. I leaned my head against my husband, feeling an overwhelming, radiant sense of absolute freedom. The fallout over the next 30 days was swift, brutal, and entirely public. I did not have to seek out the information because the elite social circles of Atlanta thrived on scandalous gossip. My parents' spectacular downfall became the sole topic of conversation at every single charity gala and country club luncheon in the city. Exactly 30 days after the anniversary dinner, my father's worst nightmare became a harsh reality. A team of private security contractors arrived at the sprawling Buckhead mansion precisely at 9 in the morning. They changed every lock on the property and supervised as my parents were forced to carry their belongings out to the curb in cardboard boxes. The local news media, tipped off by a vindictive former friend of my mother's, had a helicopter circling overhead to capture the entire humiliating eviction on live television. My mother lost her prestigious social club memberships the very next day. Her so-called loyal friends completely abandoned her, refusing to return her frantic phone calls once her bankruptcy became public knowledge. My parents were forced to move into a tiny, outdated two-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood far outside the city limits. Valerie faced a ruthless investigation by the State Ethics Board. The extensive audit of her corporate communications provided undeniable proof that she had repeatedly weaponized her law firm to threaten and intimidate vulnerable small business owners, including my own art clients. She was permanently disbarred and heavily fined, completely destroying her carefully curated identity as an untouchable legal shark. Without her massive salary and Terrence's Wall Street bonuses, their luxury Hamptons estate was swiftly repossessed by the bank. Terrence fared no better. Blacklisted from every major financial institution in the country, he was forced to take a miserable entry-level sales job at a regional insurance company just to keep food on the table. The stress of their sudden poverty shattered their toxic marriage. Valerie and Terrence spent their days bitterly blaming each other for their financial ruin, trapped in a miserable, loveless relationship fueled entirely by mutual resentment. The Golden family had completely devoured itself, collapsing under the immense weight of its own arrogance and greed. I did not waste a single moment mourning their destruction. I was far too busy building my own empire. Exactly 6 months after that fateful dinner, I stood in the center of the massive sunlit atrium of the brand new Apex Ledger Global headquarters. The soaring glass walls offered a spectacular, unobstructed view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The space was breathtaking, modern, and radiating with brilliant creative energy. I held a sleek, digital tablet in my hands, directing a team of professional art handlers as they carefully installed the final piece of a massive multi-million-dollar corporate art collection I had spent the last half-year curating. I had scoured galleries across 3 different continents to select these magnificent pieces. My art consulting business had exploded in popularity. After word spread that I was the primary curator for the hottest financial technology firm in the world, elite corporate clients began begging for my services. I was no longer a struggling artist begging for scraps of validation. I was a highly respected, heavily sought-after creative director, commanding top-tier industry fees. I heard familiar, steady footsteps echoing across the polished marble floor. I turned around to see Elijah walking toward me. He was dressed in his signature, impeccably tailored dark suit, looking just as powerful and commanding as the day his photograph had graced the cover of Forbes magazine. But when he looked at me, the ruthless corporate titan disappeared, entirely replaced by the incredibly warm, supportive man who had always believed in my vision when nobody else did. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me close as he looked up at the stunning, massive abstract painting currently being hoisted onto the main atrium wall. "It looks absolutely incredible, Zuri," my husband whispered, kissing the side of my head. "You have completely transformed this entire building. You brought it to life." I smiled, leaning comfortably back into his solid embrace. "I did not do it alone," I replied softly, turning my head to meet his dark, loving eyes. "You gave me the canvas. I just brought the colors." Elijah smiled, reaching up to gently tuck a stray curl behind my ear. "You never needed their approval to be brilliant, Zuri. he said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You always had the talent. You just needed to realize your own immense worth." I looked out through the towering glass walls at the sprawling city below us. Atlanta was no longer a place of painful memories and toxic family obligations. It was now a spectacular playground for our shared ambitions. We had successfully conquered the very environment that had constantly tried to crush us. I finally understood that walking away from people who actively diminish your spirit is absolutely never a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate, undeniable display of personal strength. My painful past was completely gone, left behind forever in that shattered dining room. My glorious, untouchable future was standing right here holding me, and we were only just getting started today. I leaned slightly forward and tapped my manicured fingernail against the heavy black leather check presenter resting on his trembling lap. The sharp tapping sound echoed clearly over the pathetic weeping of my completely broken family. Elijah originally said he would generously cover the entire table tonight, Terrence, I stated calmly, looking directly into his terrified, glassy eyes. But since you just lost your prestigious corporate job, and Winston just lost his massive Buckhead mansion, I think it is only fair you handle your own expensive vintage Bordeaux. Good luck paying for it and try not to let it bounce. Terrence let out a loud, miserable sob, burying his pale face deep into his shaking hands. He had absolutely no remaining financial resources to cover a $12,000 restaurant bill. Valerie continued crying hysterically in the corner, completely mourning her permanently destroyed elite social status. My mother, Camille, remained absolutely paralyzed on the floor, completely unable to process her imminent public humiliation. My father, Winston, slumped forward, staring blankly at the polished mahogany wood. I felt a tremendous, overwhelming sense of absolute liberation wash over my entire soul. The heavy, toxic burden of their relentless expectations was finally gone. I turned my back on the miserable, weeping family that had constantly belittled me for 29 agonizing years. I walked smoothly back toward the head of the long table where my incredible husband was patiently waiting for me. Elijah extended his strong arm outward, offering it to me with absolute, unwavering devotion. I slipped my hand securely into the crook of his elbow, feeling the warm, reassuring strength radiating from his powerful physical presence. We did not say another word to the completely shattered people groveling behind us. We held our heads high, projecting supreme, unquestionable, and silent dignity. Together, we slowly walked toward the massive exit of the private dining room. Every single step we took felt incredibly light and beautifully purposeful. We reached the threshold, and Elijah pushed the heavy mahogany doors wide open, allowing us to step completely outside. As we crossed the entryway, the thick wooden doors smoothly swung shut behind us. A loud, satisfying click echoed through the corridor, officially locking the Winstons inside their miserable, self-made prison. The suffocating, toxic noise of my deeply abusive past was permanently shut out forever. A fresh, clean, highly exhilarating silence instantly washed over me now. We began strolling down the opulent, highly decorated hallway of the elite country club. The contrast between our current reception and our initial arrival was absolutely staggering. When we first walked into this building 2 hours ago, the staff had treated us with noticeable condescension and subtle disdain. They had viewed my quiet husband as a complete nobody, entirely unworthy of their elite luxury service. Now the entire atmosphere had drastically shifted into something entirely different. The shocking news regarding Elijah's true billionaire identity had clearly spread through the internal communications network of the prestigious establishment like a dangerous wildfire. Every single employee we passed immediately stopped whatever menial task they were performing to offer their absolute undivided attention. The formally dressed waiters, the elegant hostesses, and the strict security guards all bowed respectfully as we gracefully glided past them. It was not the fake, forced politeness they previously offered my father. It was pure, unadulterated awe mixed with genuine, deep reverence. The general manager of the club, who had aggressively catered to Terrence's obnoxious demands earlier, practically sprinted across the massive lobby to personally hold the heavy front glass doors wide open for my incredibly wealthy tech titan husband. Good evening, Mr. Hayes. The manager stammered, his face pale and his voice trembling with obvious immense fear. Please let me know if there is absolutely anything else we can ever do for you, sir. Elijah did not even verbally acknowledge the terrified, sweating man. He simply gave a subtle single nod of his head, projecting pure regal dominance. We stepped smoothly out of the bright, suffocating lobby and into the crisp, beautiful, cool Atlanta night air. The gentle evening breeze immediately washed over my skin, carrying away the last remaining traces of my family and their toxic, suffocating vanity. We walked gracefully down the sweeping concrete steps toward the main circular driveway. I fully expected to see the ordinary rented black sedan we had arrived in earlier. That humble vehicle had successfully served its specific strategic purpose for the evening stress test. Instead, a completely different automobile was waiting silently for us under the warm, glowing portico lights. The dedicated valet driver was not bringing around a basic sedan. He was standing sharply at absolute perfect attention beside a breathtakingly gorgeous custom-armored midnight black Maybach. The massive, sleek luxury vehicle radiated unadulterated supreme wealth and true undeniable power. The impeccably dressed private driver immediately stepped forward and smoothly pulled the heavy rear passenger door completely open for us. Elijah gently placed his warm, protective hand on the small of my lower back, guiding me forward with absolute profound loving care. I gracefully slid into the incredibly plush, pristine leather interior of the immaculate luxury car. Elijah stepped in right behind me, and the driver secured the heavy armored door, shutting out the entire external world. The deep tinted windows provided us with an intimate, perfectly shielded sanctuary away from the prying, greedy eyes of the ruined elite class. We settled deeply into the incredibly comfortable, expansive seats. The powerful, pristine engine purred to life with a quiet, dominant rumble. I turned my head to look directly at the brilliant, supportive man who had completely changed my entire existence. Elijah looked back at me, and we shared a long, silent look of absolute, profound peace and ultimate, unshakable victory. The majestic Maybach smoothly accelerated, gliding effortlessly away from the opulent country club into the warm, welcoming Atlanta night. We completely left the pathetic, shattered ruins of the fake high society far behind us, driving toward our glorious, unbreakable future.